Wel, helo, Andrew Green yw fy enw i, a fi yw detholwr Caso am eleni. Dwi'n ddiolchgar iawn i swyddogion y gymdeithas am y fraint, a braint yw hi mewn gwirionedd, o allu dethol gweithiau celf cyfoes i Caso ag i gasgliadau celf trwy Gymru. My name's Andrew Green, and it was back, I think, in June 2019 that Sandra Anstey asked me if I would be the selector for that year or the next year and buy some works for Caso and for collections throughout Wales. Thanks to COVID, of course, it's taken 2 years to get to this point being the announcement of the works and the artists. The original intention back last summer was to have a face-to-face meeting, of course, to celebrate the selection. And we intend to do the same this year in the Glynfyfian with the artists present, but of course it hasn't been possible because of COVID. So this short online session has been arranged as a kind of simulation of a face-to-face event. I should say we're very grateful to Roland Davis and to Philippa and David Robbins for their technical help in putting all this together. This session's in two parts. First, I'm going to say a little bit about the two artists and about their works that I selected. And then I'm going to talk to the artists themselves about their works and the background to them. So I hope you'll enjoy both halves. I should say at the beginning, I feel very privileged to have been asked by Caso to be a selector. And I'm very grateful indeed for the help and guidance I've had from Sandra and also from Arthur Parker and others in putting the whole thing together. In approaching the selection, I've kept two criteria of my own in mind, quite apart from Caso's own guidance. First of all, I wanted works which would excite my eye and mind for that matter. And second, I wanted to be confident that members of Caso and members of the public would feel the same way as I do about the works that I've selected. Now, the first artist that I selected is Paul Emanuel, and you'll be seeing some of the works of Paul as we go along, and this is one of them. Paul, of course, is a well-established artist, both in Wales and further than Wales. And I've been familiar with his art for probably about 10 years or so. 10 years ago, he was named as Welsh Artist of the Year. He's a painter, but not in any traditional sense. Instead of using canvas or board as a ground for the paint he uses the fleeces of sheep. And his first inspiration was the marks that local farmers painted on the coats of their sheep to identify their flocks. Paul's first works were quite small, but he's been able to work on a much larger scale since he had the use of a converted chapel, Nant y Ffin, above Pen y Cai, the village he lives in the Upper Tawe Valley. The largest of the three works by Paul is going to be housed in the Glynfyfian Art Gallery, and it's simply called Blue Vertical Painting. The fleece is wool from black-faced sheep, and its natural colours, as you can see, vary from near white to quite dark brown. Paul's attached the fleece to stretcher bars so that the whole thing can hang vertically. What he did was to allow paint, turquoise acrylic pigment, to seep through the fleece from the back to emerge in whatever way it will. And you can see the effect of that here. The paint comes out as these small, sharp tongues of paint arranged in broken lines along the vertical channels of the spun fleece. And that's the turquoise paint, not the only paint. There's an occasional spot of bright scarlet red. Go back to the work itself. Paul is using paint which is just commercial acrylic paint, and it's hard to avoid really the stark contrast between the wholly artificial medium, the paint, and the wholly natural backing. And there's another contrast between the echo of quite an old rural practice rooted in a specific place, and the very different abstracted world of the modern studio and the modern gallery. From a distance, this painting impresses you with its size and its weight, but if you stand up close to it, you can really get a vivid view of the dense and complicated textures and these startling paint colours. I selected two much smaller works by Paul, and both of these are going to enter the collections of Agair in Brecon, not so far from Penycae, as it happens, along the sheep tracks. Green Nantafine, this one, is a bit like a hairpiece, but drenched in this greeny blue paint. And the second of them, which is called Soft Vessel, molds a glass or other vessel and then transmutes it into a wholly woolly state. All of these works are very suggestive, and they're generous, and like all good art, they leave a lot of work for the viewer to do. My second artist is Lara Davis. She comes from Maesteg and lives in Cardiff. She's had quite a different career as a mathematician before she decided to resume her first interest in art. And she's been doing a master's course recently in the Royal College of Art in London. Lara uses paint in, on the surface anyway, a more traditional way. And what I found most immediately attractive about her work when I first saw it in the flesh was the obvious intense pleasure that she gets from working the paint, and of course working out how it should be used. And you sense that as soon as you stand in front of one of these canvases. Paint and Lara are obviously natural partners. But all is not quite what it seems at first sight. Three canvases I selected belong together, this is the second of them, belong together as works painted, as you might say, after Manet. The original works were 16 pictures of flowers in vases. Edouard Manet made them as the very last paintings he made before he died in 1882. The flowers were gifts to him, the original flowers were gifts to him, and his paintings were gifts in return to the friends who'd helped him when he was ill. Now, Lara happened to have in her studio a book of reproductions of these paintings, and what she set out to do was to reproduce them herself in paint. Of course, that's not unusual because artists often pay tribute to earlier masters. But what Lara's reproduced are not Manet's paintings directly. Instead, they're camera phone images of the pages in the book that include the images of the paintings. And in this one, you can see the distortion of the curved page and the gutter and the edge of the page and the reflection of the shiny page, which was captured by the camera, but of course not in the original painting. So Lara's paintings are really at 3 removes from Manet's original pictures. And yet, paradoxically, they're not reduced versions of Manet, either in size or texture or colour. They're fully realised paintings in their own right. And they speak to you really directly and vividly as Manet's do. I'd hoped that the Glynfydd would accept all of these 3 paintings by Lara, but because they do belong together, but in the end they would accept only 2. However, that decision has meant that it's been possible to offer the other one to another venue, a venue where by chance Lara has exhibited in the past, Oriel Plas Glynweddw in Llanbedrog. So the outcome has really been very, very happy indeed. So that's the choices that I've made on your behalf. I'm only sorry that you can't see them in the flesh today. As is often true of people, of course, and interacting with people, there's no better way of getting to know works of art of this kind than by meeting them face to face. So I hope you'll have a chance to make the direct acquaintance of these works at some stage fairly soon. In the case of the Glenvivian ones, you can see them in room 6 of the gallery until towards the end of August. And now I'm really pleased to say that Lara and Paul are with me virtually today to say a little bit about the works of art, how they came to be, and a little bit about how they go about making art. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
The first question is a rather obvious one, and I wonder if you can both of you tell us a little bit about how the selected works came to be made in the first place. And as we go through, by the way, I'll be showing some images which both Lara and Paul have given to illustrate what they're likely to say. So Lara, maybe you can kick off and say a little bit about how your Manet works came to be.
Yeah, sure. So this body of work was made between 2017 and last year. And like with a lot of art ideas, really, it came about by accident. At the time, I was interested in swimming pools, in the patterns and the play of water, and thinking about David Hockney and his series of swimming pools. And I was lucky enough to go to Frieze, London, where there was a Ed Richet's pamphlet, 9 swimming pools in a broken glass. So I took a photo of the swimming pool to recreate it in paint. But then looking at the image on my phone, I loved how the shadow, the page of the book created the shadow on the left-hand side. And I like the idea also of starting with a photograph of a swimming pool, and then how could I transform that into paint. So that was the very first book painting I did. And then go back to the studio. The environment of the studio has always been important to me, always is. It's like where these things live. And I was just thinking about the people who live in the studio with me, my heroes, if you will, people like Philip Guston, these paintings that live in artist books in my studio, and also postcards just masking taped on the wall. So I started painting other paintings, and materially, I loved the way that the studio lights reflected on the book pages. So it felt important to capture that because it was about the environment, the place of the studio. But also then there was this kind of play between trying to capture the painterliness of the original painting, but that had been photographed. So you had the sheen of the book page, and then, as Andrew mentioned, I was taking another step back by photographing it with a camera phone. And that's really why I've included the page of the book, because it's important for me to have this sense of removal between the source material and the final outcome.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Lara. If I to turn to you, Paul, now, and just ask you how your own works came to be made.
Well, the main elements of my work are broadsheet, fleece, and paint. I'd been working internationally for extended periods, and I felt I really needed to be around the farm more, and wanted to kind of create a form to work with day by day. I'd been interested in sheep marker for a while and how it used colour and marks in landscape. So I started talking to farming friends about these marks and colours and where I could get some fleece to work with to begin to experiment with things. And fleece really doesn't have any value anymore, and it generally costs more to shear than it's worth as a material. So with Gethin, I get the vast majority of the fleece I use. So I began painting into the wool with artist paints. I wanted something which was very direct and a visceral way of making connections between animal and human cultures. And kind of to accentuate that, I don't really process the fleece in any way. I just pull out sticks and debris caught in it, which kind of keeps things as close as possible between the viewer, animal, and the paint. I generally use painting stretcher bars, to fix the wall and make surface. The selection Andrew's made for Cassou shows different ways the fleece can be manipulated. If I'm using a single fleece, the works tend to be smaller. And for larger works, I'll use simple craft techniques like spinning and weaving to make flatness from the hairy stuff, and then build scale from there. The soft felt works use paint instead of water to make coloured felt, which I then press into pots. I use to mix down paint in, and when they're dry and I take them out of their moulds, they kind of slump under gravity to find their own form. And they only just show marks made from the process of making them. So the 3 works selected have a range of paint applications and show different dynamics. With blue vertical, I used hand-twisted lengths of fleece to make a surface of strong verticals, but which has a soft geometry to them. And I painted on the back of the surface face down, really allowing the paint to reveal the structure of the surface as it flowed from the back to the front and dried into points, really.
Thanks, Paul. We've talked a bit about paint already, and paint is obviously really, really important to both of you. Lara, what does paint mean to you as a medium?
I mean, I love paint, and you know, especially from being on the MA, obviously I'm getting exposed to so much more art and, you know, books and films. But for me, it just always boils down to paint. I just can't escape it. And I've been trying to think about why that is. And I don't know whether it's when I look at a painting and it just sparks something in me, whether I'm kind of connecting with, you know, the moment the artist had when they were, you know, in the zone and making that painting, and it just worked. Because, you know, you know when a painting works and it doesn't, and I'm not quite sure what exactly it is, but it's just this kind of spark that I get, this reaction to paint that I struggle to get with other mediums.
Thanks, Lara. Paul, how about you? Where does your paint come from, and what's the nature of paint that really appeals to you a lot?
Well, I suppose the thing about paint for me as a material is its malleability, really, in different contexts, and it has kind of inherent references as physical stuff. So I mostly use art paints and see it kind of as a way of using art straight from the tube, really, and then extend this idea to mirror more pragmatic uses of paint, like sheet marker. You know, sheet marker used to make a language of painted marks and colour in landscape, and it does offer broad readings on different modes of production with paint and its physical and visual properties. So the placing of colour and mark making is a very real code and shows where the flock is from initially and the condition of single animals even. And the combination of these things gives a visual reading of landscape in real time. I'll tend to use paint straight from tubes, pots or tubs, and colour as colour. And I don't generally mix colour apart from large quantities of tint I use for washes. I use mostly primary or tertiary colours, and I leave them to mix naturally with the wash when I paint. Basically, I work like this to keep things very simple and let the paint do its thing with whatever form I'm working. And my ideas for form come from how I make the surface, how I paint, and how the painting is going to dry, importantly. And working like this has different influences on each painting. So I'll paint on the front surfaces, on the back surfaces, sometimes together, and I use various thicknesses and fluidities of paint to show the nature of the surface. So when I actually paint, I'll use different methods like combing, pouring by hand, and in combination with things like the weight of the painting itself, dipping and gravity. And when I paint face down above the floor, like blue vertical painting, the paint flows from the back to the front along the hair, making pointed marks, face down on the floor. The painting flattens into areas which takes on the texture of an absent layer, and dipping then clings to hair and mats. It's, I suppose it's kind of like a modernist approach to painting from an animal husbandry perspective. Time, funnily enough, is an important part of the work, as the paintings take weeks and weeks and weeks to dry. And I don't really know what's happened until then. And I can't really rush any part of the process of painting or drying. And this time aspect seems to bring a kind of meditative quality to the surfaces. And Nick Thornton at the National Museum, I think he said he described my work in a talk he did as post-conceptual landscape painting.
That's a rather nice title, yeah. Both of you seem to, on the surface anyway, to have a lot to do with the past. I mean, Laura, in your case, the past being in these works Manet. I wonder if for you the past is something that's just contingent to starting off point, or whether it's something a little bit more than that. I don't know how you react to that.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, as soon as you start working with an image, you know, it becomes its own autonomous thing, especially in the layers of removal that I use in my process. But I mean, there's a number of things that feed into it, really. You know, as painters, you know, as artists, we are painfully aware of the canon of art, of painting that has come before us. So, you know, there's this kind of this feeling of weight of history. I mean, you know, when you're in the studio and you've got the Manet and Guston kind of looking down at you from the shelves. So there's this feeling of kind of that you know, what can you do that's new in art when all these people have gone before you? But I don't think that's a problem, because I think, you know, as you mentioned, Andrew, for me, the idea of paying tribute is really important. And also, I really enjoy the play between, you know, which marks are mine, which marks are Manet's. You know, with the Ed Ruscha, it was a photograph and then it became a painting. So there's kind of, there's a challenge and a fun in exploring that and kind of like walking that line between copying and then it being an influence. So yeah, I kind of think of it as like a like basking in the reflected glory of my heroes, I guess. And yeah, I don't think that's a bad thing, because I'm kind of elevating their best bits, really.
Yeah, well, you're certainly not Manet, and you definitely have your own style, so there's certainly nothing to fear there. Paul, how about you? The rural traditions, of course, as far as the past are concerned, really very important for you.
Yeah, I think the past is very present on the farm and the chapel, and it really does come with land. And it's that thing of, you kind of get judged by how well you keep it. And I'm identified by it as well, which kind of like leads back to kind of mark making and things. And few people in the village even know my surname. So I'm known as Paul Nantafine. So if you ask for Paul Emanuel, nobody's going to know who you're talking about. So I've acquired the name of the farm as well now. I've always been influenced by the environment I'm working in. The first time I was working in Taiwan on an international residency, it ended up taking on the form of a kind of endurance event, really. But Nantafine Chapel now, it offers a very different, nuanced perspective on things. It's somewhere that's developed ideas about how influences and settings really can affect viewpoints. And my local community is very interested in the new life of the chapel, as many of the village residents have been baptized there, married there, worshipped, and have been buried there. And yeah, the reuse of the chapel, and with me working in it the way I do, is kind of seen as having a wider community impact as a spiritual and agricultural diversification in the scope of Valley Life. And the history of the place is, it's on the gravestone still around, the chapel. And the chapel is on what was Nantafin farmland. And so it has another kind of identification thing that's going on, and which is always there. And so together the graves and the chapel interior makes for a very meditative atmosphere again, which I can only say really encourages me to be as honest as possible with my mark making when I paint.
Thanks, Paul. You're both very distinctive as artists with very distinctive styles and methods. I wonder about the reaction, public reaction to your work. What public reactions have there been, and quite how important public reaction is to you? Lara, do you want to kick off?
Yeah. So the reactions to these book paintings have all been pretty positive, and why that was interesting was because it made me think, oh, actually there's something that I need to explore further in this idea, rather than jumping onto the next subject matter too quickly, which is what I tended to do, particularly before I started my MA. So yeah, it slowed me down really, because it was other people saying, hang on, you need to look into this a bit further. And the other reason I'm interested in public reaction is I'm intrigued whether when people see these paintings, are they thinking about maybe when they saw an actual Manet painting in life, or a Guston painting, or maybe they've got a book or what have you, and whether the reason that they have a positive reaction is because there's a sense of nostalgia there. And I'm intrigued by the kind of the positive and negative implications of the nostalgia. And you say about, is public reaction important? And up to this point, I think we all say, like, I don't care what people think, I'm an artist, I'm doing my own thing. But I'm doing the MA at the moment, so my work's never been scrutinised like it has at this point. And of course it affects you. I say it doesn't, but it does. But as I said, I think that can be a positive thing, because it can make me look at a subject matter in more depth. I mean, obviously I don't want to make work for other people. I want to make work for myself. I think you've got to always do that. And because I didn't do a BA in art, I did a Bachelor of Science in Maths. I think that's actually helped, because I haven't had that so much of the weight of history that I've talked about affecting me up until this point. I mean, also, another interesting point these days is with social media, particularly Instagram in art, you kind of public reaction or some kind of reaction is always there to be had. But what I found interesting since starting the MA is I don't post as much as I used to. And I don't know whether that's because I want to, I'm doing this stuff for myself, and I don't need that kind of positive reaction and somebody to say, like, well done, and the number of likes. Or is it because maybe, as I said, with the kind of tributes and showing the best bits of people, maybe I only want to put the best bits on Instagram. So yeah, really kind of doing the MA has opened me up to public reaction in a way that I didn't used to think about before.
Yeah, that's very interesting how in recent years artists, if they choose to anyway, can open themselves up to huge public scrutiny through things like social networking. Paul, what have people made of your painted fleeces?
Well, I think the going to go home and eat eggs, I think, has been a standout reaction so far. And I did have some, maybe not complaints as such, but the show I just did at Plaza Glynneweddw, a few people complained about the smell of the paintings. But I think with showing things, good reactions are good, as I'm sure, everyone likes to feel supported and valued for what they're trying to achieve with their work. And bad ones are bad, but that's a bad thing. But they never really made me think or question my practice at all. Because I think the way my practice is set up anyway, that if the paintings are good, like Lara touched on earlier about how does this thing happen, but then when these things do happen, and the nature of my work is, I suppose, it's very physical, so it couldn't really necessarily be any other way. So kind of bad criticism, I don't know, it just mostly makes me want to be better with things.
Water off a sheep's back, really.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Great. A couple of questions for you, Lara, specifically. I mentioned that you'd been a mathematician in an earlier existence. Is there any connection at all between being a mathematician and that experience and being a visual artist? And secondly, you've obviously had this amazing experience in the Royal College very, very recently. And I'm wondering whether that's really changed the way you do art in any radical way.
Yeah. So, I mean, your first question, the only way I think there's a similarity between art and maths for me is I like problem solving, and with the painting, it's always about solving that problem on the canvas and fighting with the paint and working out how that happens. I don't tend to grid up or use a projector or anything when I paint, and that's a deliberate decision because I like what happens in the gap between my tiny phone screen and then the massive painting or whatever size it is. I like to have that kind of well, that's the problem that has to be solved, basically. Yeah, and the second thing is, going to the RCA has changed my work like I wouldn't have ever imagined. And there are two main things that have changed. So the first is that I've begun to write a lot more, and about my work, but also as a practice in its own right. And I never wrote about my work out of choice before. It was only under duress if I had to, do an application or an artist statement. But from being on the MA and just being exposed to so much incredible reading material and kind of having that direction as well, it's just opened up my eyes, and I feel as if writing has kind of been a different way to kind of work through those problems. So whereas I always worked through the problems with paint, and paint was the medium that I was familiar with to solve those problems, writing has felt like a different way of solving problems and coming out to something. So that's the first thing. And the second thing that has changed is I've begun to focus on quite a narrow subject matter, whereas before Royal College, I used to kind of like bounce around subject matter really quickly, and I needed something to spark me, and then once that had happened, I'd make a painting of it, and that spark could be the gleam of the pages on a book in my studio, or it could be watching Wimbledon on TV and just the way the tennis court looked, and it really wouldn't matter, and it would be really random. Whereas since being in Royal College and reading more and thinking, there's one area, there are a couple of subject areas that I'm focusing on. So how my personal history affects how I live day to day. The idea of object as souvenir, and then also the contrast between collecting and hoarding. And these paintings here were an investigation into the idea of hoarding, but then also how then making a painting, you're creating an object, and how that then functions as a souvenir of your family or what have you. So yeah, talking about souvenirs of family and heirlooms, the other main focus of my painting in Royal College and writing actually has been responding to my great aunt Margie's diary from 1949, which included a journey on horseback that Margie undertook from Land's End to John O'Groats and back, solo when she was only 24 years old, which is remarkable. And what I've been doing is kind of picking out pages from the journey and elevating them. But there's also, I mean, the journey is only one part of her whole year. So I've been intrigued by her day-to-day life, you know, the kind of the domesticity. There's a wonderful passage, well, there are 3 times in the diary Margie mentions her mum buying a fridge, and then thinking, wow, that must have been one of the first fridges in Wales. But then the fact that I know that fridge is still in the family house made me thinking about, you know, the idea of hoarding as a familial practice, and kind of that, how that influences me, and the contrast between how I like to keep my space. So yeah, I also love this idea that I'm kind of creating a collaboration with Margie across 70 years. So even though I haven't been able to retrace her footsteps, as it were, I've kind of taken a different journey through the diary.
That's absolutely fascinating. It really is a very, very different way of approaching things, and it's very interesting what you say about the influence of writing and interest in writing on your visual art. Paul, a question for you. It all strikes me that some artists are constantly restlessly changing and looking for new things all the time, changing their medium, their theme, or whatever. And then another group of artists that really just prefer the intensity of staying with the same approach throughout. Would you say you sort of belong to that second group or not?
Very much so, I think. I mean, since doing those residencies, I mean, I've kind of, the thread of things has been using pigment in different ways, and just kind of transposed to what I do now up in the chapel. And yeah, as an artist, I'm really interested in developing form, and then the day-to-day working of that, and then how that influences other things. I was asked at an exhibition once if that was all I did, and well, my reply basically was, it's all I need to do. You just have to look, learn to see things, really. And so making difference with mark making is really important for what I do. And it can be really subtle development or something that appears a bit more radical, but both are equally valid in terms of how the form develops. And I think because the way I work by bringing through strands of different things together, the working of them obviously produces many possibilities and variations in lots of different ways. And I suppose this way of painting, where one work kind of offers many possibilities for what you can take on to the next in the form, means that the marks come from form, and then form come from marks, and one identifying the other, and then on to the next. In terms of kind of how the form works with, yeah, like one to another, to another, to another. It's not kind of like trying to capture a fleeting moment, maybe like Monet's repetition of haystack paintings. I think they're more kind of singular objects in time, as they use real material qualities of paint and time, and they're only finished when the paint is dry. So it's a kind of way of painting that uses the drying of paint to paint with, if you like. And I feel even with simple elements, there's a real beauty in the combination of time, my marks, and the materials I use. They are, yeah, saying they're very simple, but they bring things really close together that are kind of physical, sensual, tactile, smelly, and I see them really as a kind of a collection of objects that continue to inform each other with colour and their form.
Thanks, Paul. The last question I've got for you sounded a good question at the time, but I think you've probably both answered it already. What's next? What's the next big thing for you in your art? Perhaps Laura, you could start.
Yeah. So as I said before, I'm trying to focus on one idea, and I certainly don't feel done with Margie's diary yet. But what I'm trying to do is experiment with materials, and just play with how the materiality of the object can kind of direct a viewer into thinking about, you know, the past or nostalgia. So these paintings that you were showing are all made on velour. Some of them kept simple like that, where the diary page has kind of influenced me to you know, think about other things. Like I look at that and think about a sports field from viewed from above, or I've been trying to keep the paintings more open in that sense. And then some of the paintings on the velour, I've worked really fought with the paint to create this kind of amazing texture that's got almost like an ancient quality to it. So I guess it kind of reflects what Paul was just saying about time, and about, you know, how materiality kind of can hold that history, and about just kind of slowing down. So eager to jump onto the next idea. So I'm going to continue to use the diary as inspiration for painting. And, you know, it might be that there's a passage in the diary that sparks me, and, you know, I go heading off onto a different subject kind of linked to that. So yeah, watch this space.
That's great. We're really looking forward to seeing what you're going to do next, Lara. How about you, Paul? What's new? What's new for you at the moment?
Probably more architectural works, and to complete a triptych in the chapel, which I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what happens with that in context. I've made 3 works to date based on floor areas of the chapel, and they follow areas I've cleared of pews and the pulpit, and so they can be very large in scale. That can be shown in different ways, like on walls as large paintings, folded up on plinths, freestanding self-supporting forms as well. And so I'll be weaving directly onto the floor, so the scale can be as large as the whole chapel if I want. And I can use part of the chapel floor, and the only thing that dictates really is architectural features like pillars and things, which I'll kind of go around to focus on those features as this kind of soft architectural form, really. And then possibly look at spaces to present a series of these architectural chapel works in a gallery context. And I've made the first work of the triptych, and it's incredibly simple, but it's doing something very beautiful and concise. And so I'm beginning to consider then which forms would complement that on the same scale. And another ongoing thing, I've been burning all my offcuts of fleece and then catching the soot and then using that to make pigment with. And kind of ideas and techniques developed from a visit to a Sumi Ink factory in Japan as part of my Creative Wales Award. And it's really as a way of me being able to use everything I get from Geth, really. And I began making monotypes with the stuff, and recently a series of soft forms, which are still drying, maybe ready by September.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Paul. It sounds as though you've got a lot on your plate, and you're as restless as anybody, really. Of course, if you carry on with these architectural ones, you'll probably end up making sheep. Well, we come to the end of the session really now, and I just really need to thank both of you for expressing all your views and thoughts so brilliantly. I'd like to congratulate you as well on being selected, and to wish you well in the future. I mean, it's brilliant that we've got such committed and thoughtful and creative artists in our midst at the moment. It's also good that your works are going to be in public collections. I think that's really, really important for all contemporary artists, really, that people are able to see them in the flesh properly. I hope too that members of CASO and of course members of the public will be able to see all your works as well, the selected ones and others, as far as they can, and enjoy them, because I think both of you have produced works that are incredibly interesting and incredibly enjoyable. So thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi I gyd. A diolch I chi am wylio a gwrando. A diolch am y cyfle hefyd, CASO, am I brynu y gweithiau ar eich cyfer chi. Felly, dyna'r cyfan, that's the lot. And thank you all very, very much. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Very much. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.